My name is Mike O'Neill. I'm the Associate Curator of Aquatic Collections here at the New England Aquarium.
Hello, I'm John Rossi. I'm a touring drummer with a passion for animal conservation. When I'm on the road, I spend as much time as possible visiting zoos, aquariums, and conservation organizations. Now, I want to share those places with you. I'll be talking to keepers, vets, conservationists, anyone who can help me in my mission of connecting my people to animals through their people. Join me on my Rossifari. Hello, hi, how are you? Welcome back to another episode of the Rossifari podcast. Y'all, this is our second week in a row taking a look at some of the different things going on at New England Aquarium. And actually, out of the 3 episodes we're doing from the facility, this is the only one that is actually coming to you from the aquarium itself. And we're sticking with our theme from last week a little bit. So last week, we heard all about the Sea Turtle Hospital and the rescues they do there. And today, you're going to spend a lot of time learning about the 3 resident sea turtles that live at New England Aquarium. Most importantly, you're going to be learning about Myrtle. Now, you'll hear about this on the podcast a little bit, but to say the least, Myrtle is royalty. In my entire time that I have spent in the world of zoos and aquariums, there have only been 2 animals that I have ever heard called the queen by multiple people. One of them was Luna, who was the oldest red panda in the SSP at Cape May County Zoo until she passed away. And the other one is Myrtle, who lives at New England Aquarium. So you're going to hear all about her, as well as 2 loggerhead turtles, Carolina and Retread, and all the other cool stuff that call the giant ocean tank home at New England Aquarium. We get into all other kinds of stuff too, of course, because, it's this podcast and that's what we do. So I'm looking forward to sending you to that interview. But before I do so, quick reminder, make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss any of my interview episodes or any Zoo News episodes that come out on Friday. This Friday is going to be a special recap of the AAZV conference in Toronto, where I currently am sitting and recording this. And then also make sure you follow along on the socials at Rossifari, on TikTok at Rossifari Pod. And hey, if you'd like to support the podcast, you can do so for as little as $3 a month by going to patreon.com/Rossifari. So with all that said, let's get to it. Here is my interview with Mike O'Neill of New England Aquarium.
And we are just outside the giant ocean tank.
Yes, we are. And we were just at the giant ocean tank and you were feeding Myrtle.
Indeed.
I'm rarely jealous, even though I get to see a lot of people do a lot of cool things. But I was very, very jealous. I love Myrtle.
Myrtle is the highlight of my work day, typically.
Yeah. So let's dive right in.
Yeah.
Tell me all about Myrtle. Now, I will give you a little background first, because obviously I'm the expert here now. Just in my own world. So when I started to, realize that there were zoos and aquariums around other than the local ones I went to, and when I started to travel and then tour, I don't know how, because it wasn't like a big social media thing or whatever. Mm-hmm. But I learned of Myrtle fairly early on in my life. And I knew that in Boston, there was a Myrtle.
We love that.
And when I first came to the aquarium and saw Myrtle, it was like meeting a celebrity.
Yeah.
And I don't even understand how that happened, because this was before viral was a thing. Mm-hmm. But Myrtle was a thing.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
She's definitely achieved, I think, a level of fame that is rare.
Yeah, especially for a turtle.
For a turtle, yeah. For aquatic creatures, I mean, she's remarkable. She is large. That usually helps, I would say, stick in people's minds. But I would say she also has maybe an uncomparable legacy in terms of, she came to us right after we opened. She's been here since 1970. So very nearly 100% of people who come to the New England Aquarium have crossed paths with Myrtle. And you just can't replace that kind of impact.
Yeah, no, that's really incredible. Actually, when we were at the tank, there was an older couple that were hanging out next to us and talking about the fact that they were coming here for decades now, and they didn't realize that it had been the same turtle they were seeing the whole time.
Yeah.
But when you said that, they were like in awe, and that's really cool. That's really amazing.
Yeah, really powerful, and really, it's nice to see how common it is that we get multiple generations of folks who come to the aquarium, parents with kids, grandparents, and grandkids, all talking about having met Myrtle or seen Myrtle in the past and remember them, and that she's sort of like synonymous with an experience at the England Aquarium.
Yeah, it's a very special thing. It also makes Jen's life a little bit easier because, she's got to do PR and you already have this amazing,
Love that, yes.
I mean, honestly, let's be honest, Myrtle's the one doing the PR. Jen's just the one taking the calls from podcasters. So.
Yep. And she's quite good at it, I would say. She sort of has the personality to match her physical appearance because she's outgoing, she's curious, she likes to insert herself into situations. So I think she's got the complete package when it comes to sort of the attributes that are endearing to our visitors.
Yeah, so let's dive into it a little bit more and just talk about. So you mentioned she got here right from kind of the beginning. I remember when I first heard about her, there was this. I don't even know if you can call it a rumor, but the way I heard it was that the aquarium was built around her, which I know is not actually the case, but is kind of. I remember like being younger and having this mental image of like just a turtle that an aquarium was literally built around. And I know that's not how it works, but I'm curious, what is her story?
Yeah, well, the aquarium itself was definitely built around the giant ocean tank. So that's 100% true where, pouring the concrete to build this facility, it was the giant ocean tank first on Central Wharf and everything else came in around it.
Oh, wow.
And then for Myrtle herself, she came to us, in the early days, within 6 months of our actual opening to the public. She was previously at an aquarium that used to be on Cape Cod down in Provincetown called the Provincetown Marine Aquarium. They were, I believe, sort of a seasonal operation. So they would sort of open up for the boom summer season on the Cape and in the wintertime close down and need to find places for some of their larger creatures like Myrtle to go. And so we actually had a relationship where Myrtle was temporarily on loan to us during an off season initially. And then in 1970, they ended up saying, we're going to actually close up shop. Would you like Myrtle and XYZ other creatures as permanent residents? And we said, most certainly. And she's been here ever since.
Wow. Yeah. The idea of sharing a sea turtle is a lot.
Yes. Yeah. Yep. And it's amazing back in 1970 that, the way things worked was different. And so, donating animals across organizations still happens today. But it was a different time back, before the Endangered Species Act, before lots of regulations that now apply to turtles. Myrtle's kind of transcends all that, and her legacy spans from middle of the century all the way to now.
Yeah, that's really amazing. Wow. And so because she came from that facility and because it was a very different time and Zims wasn't around yet, we don't actually know how old Myrtle is officially, but what are the thoughts on this?
Yeah. So we don't know her exact age. We sort of come up with a conservative estimate that she's probably between 75 and 95. And that's based on the fact that when we received her, she was weighing around 200 pounds. And so we assume at that weight that she was probably an adult, but it's hard to age sea turtles just based on weight and not any other measurements. So we go off of a ballpark that she could have been between 20 and 40, let's say, back in 1970. Then we add on the 54 years we've had her, and we say somewhere in that 75, 95 is a reasonable ballpark.
Yeah, makes sense. And what kind of life expectancy would we be talking about?
All right, we'll be back after this quick break.
Did you see the Colombian government is spending almost $4 million to relocate Pablo Escobar's hippos?
In Brazil, a school of piranha attacked and injured at least 8 people at a beach resort.
First fatal mountain lion attack in 20 years in California.
Hey, it's me, Forrest Galante, wildlife biologist. You may have seen me on Joe Rogan's podcast or my various TV shows like Extinct or Alive or Shark Week. So join me and my friends as we break down animal news from around the world and discuss all things wildlife. Click here to unlock these animal mysteries.
That still sort of remains a mystery. We know turtles in general are long-lived.
Yes.
It's not unprecedented to get well over 100, depending on the species and circumstances. And I would say Myrtle is a unique case in that regard. She's a large green sea turtle. She's been in aquariums most of her life at this point, we assume. So it's hard to say specifically for any individual case like Myrtle, how long could she live? And we hope that she teaches us a lot down the road as we go about Myrtle's sea turtle care overall and her unique care as we get into sort of the later geriatric phase.
Absolutely. I am curious, just in terms of as she has aged here, how much and how much has the care changed? And I'm not even talking about it because we'll get to this in a minute, but about how welfare has changed over the decades.
Sure.
But just in terms of literally just caring for her as she gets older and stuff, what has that been looking like? And I know you haven't been here for all of it.
Yeah.
You're a young pup compared to her, but
Yeah. I've been honored to take care of Myrtle with my team for the past 7 years.
Nice.
It's been awesome. And just to sort of what you're saying, it's been a constant evolution. And I would say the degree of detail has continued to increase over time as record keeping and technology advances. And we're capable of using software that can track animals that is designed for animal care applications, which has not always been the case for operating zoos and aquariums. That's been a great help. And Myrtle in general has been pretty steady along the time that I've been here. We weigh her and do checks on her quarterly. So that's sort of where we get the benchmark metrics on her overall health. So collect blood sample, weight, morphometrics, any other physical and diagnostics we can do to get a sense of her overall well-being. Her weight does fluctuate seasonally and year in, year out. She goes through a period of fasting, sort of like a sea turtle brumation hibernation phase, where she's becomes very picky about what she likes to eat, and her weight can fluctuate with that. And then when we were just out there earlier, this is in peak foraging season, so she's constantly eating during the feeding sessions now, and it will pretty much take whatever we offer her, though she does have vegetable preferences that we keep tabs on over time. So that's generally is her sort of typical care routine, is quarterly health exams, daily feedings and checkups and behavioral observations from us. And then we keep nice detailed records of it all.
Nice. Very cool. Now, I mentioned obviously that welfare has significantly advanced.
Mm-hmm.
Honestly, the entire mindset of most zoos and aquariums has changed since the 70s.
Mm-hmm.
I've often said this podcast would not have existed a while ago,
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, nor do I think, do you know what was going on here in the 1970s? But how do you think that has impacted Myrtle's life as things have changed? And, how important is that to her welfare and her longevity?
Yeah, 100%. Having ways to assess welfare is sort of the foundational aspect that you need to generate. So we do have a welfare program here at the aquarium. A lot of zoos and aquariums do. And that involves routine welfare assessments where we look at certain behavioral metrics, health metrics, and sort of tabulate them all together to get a general welfare score that we can then monitor and apply looking through the months and years to individual animals over their lifespans. So that's another aspect of how we're monitoring all the animals here at the aquarium. From the historical perspective and from the giant ocean tank specifically, I would say there have always been records kept, but the degree of detail and what the focus of each record has definitely been an evolution from the 70s to now.
I believe it, yeah.
There are amazing records that I've had the pleasure to look through over the years as I've tried to make sure I have the full context of my responsibilities with the giant ocean tank, where I get to look back and see what were the things that people were writing down as their behavioral observations in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And
that's really cool, actually.
It's super cool. And the giant ocean tank also has had its own evolution, where Myrtle has been sort of the central tenet of the giant ocean tank almost since the beginning. But the giant ocean tank itself has gone through iterations where it was originally not a reef exhibit. It was sort of an open tank with less structure, I would say. Then there was a time when I think there was a shipwreck that was the original or one of the early features for habitat. That then transitioned to the first reef, which happened in the 80s. And that was sort of the stable, longest term configuration of the giant ocean tank's habitat until 2012, when we then renovated and updated the original reef and enhanced a bunch of the components of the giant ocean tank. And through it all, Myrtle was a resident and got to participate in some of those iterations where, when we had the renovation in 2012, all of the residents at the time of the giant ocean tank were relocated, and they were actually in our penguin exhibit. And the penguins had been moved to our animal care center in Quincy. And then we had used the penguin exhibit as the area to temporarily keep the giant ocean tank residents while we waited for the new exhibit to reopen. And so Myrtle has actually been in several places, not just the giant ocean tank, even though she's been a part of the giant ocean tank her whole life.
Wow. Just the idea of having all of the ocean tank, the giant ocean tank life in the penguin area is pretty intense. One of the other interviews that I did was in Quincy, in the room where the penguins lived during that time. So I did hear a little bit of that story.
Yes.
And just thought about all of the poop that had been on the floor there.
Yes. Oh, yes.
But wow, what an absolutely fascinating mental image.
The penguin exhibit had to get some tweaks itself to make it appropriate to house a variety of elasmobranchs, bony fish, and Myrtle and our other turtles. So once the penguins had been relocated, habitat modifications to the penguin tray were made. The water was obviously warmed up so that it could accommodate some more tropical creatures. And then animals were just slowly and systematically removed, hoisted up out of the giant ocean tank and lowered down to the penguin exhibit. And then the care team focused on maintaining that community in the penguin tray setting until we could then reopen the giant ocean tank and move everybody back. And Myrtle was actually, I believe, one of the first creatures into the new giant ocean tank when it reopened. And part of the design of the reef was to ensure that Myrtle would be comfortable.
Right.
And so to go back to your statement about designing the aquarium around Myrtle, the giant ocean tank definitely was made, and the habitat was designed with Myrtle in mind. Knowing we would have a Myrtle-sized creature navigating it was an important part of how we shaped the reef.
Yeah, there's a whole lot of Myrtle going on right there.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
And, you mentioned that when she arrived, she was, around 200 pounds, I think you said?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
So how big is Myrtle now?
Myrtle right now is 530 pounds. And again, as I mentioned, depending on the time of year when we weigh her, it could be a fluctuation of around 50 pounds, plus or minus, depending on what she's eating.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Very cool. There are two other turtles that live here, and we should give them, their due as well.
Indeed.
But yeah, so when y'all decided that you needed to get some subjects to properly, take care of Queen Myrtle, it went with some loggerheads.
Yes.
So tell me about the other two.
Yep. So our two loggerheads, they're named Carolina and Retread, both female loggerhead sea turtles.
And where do those names come from?
Where do they come from? So Carolina's named after the Carolinas, which is an important geographic region for loggerheads as a species where their nesting beaches can be found. And then Retread was named Retread to reflect how she kind of got a new lease on life, sort of a second life post-rehabilitation, because she stranded and was under such severe health concerns as a part of her stranding circumstances that we were skeptical if she would make it through. And when she did make a full recovery, we kind of thought of it as sort of retreading a tire, where it's now put back into service, and we have a new opportunity for her to live on and be an ambassador for her species with us in the giant ocean tank.
I love that so much.
Yeah.
So tell me more about the two loggerheads. Tell me all the things about Carolina and Retread. Retread is just possibly my favorite animal name ever.
I appreciate that.
It's a good one.
I would say it can be polarizing. Some people are like, Retread, what an interesting name. And I get the vibes that maybe they're not feeling it. But yeah, I like it. And I think it's true to her story and highlights just how resilient sea turtles can be.
Yeah.
So both of our loggerhead sea turtles came through our own rescue and rehab program here at the England Aquarium. They washed up on the beaches of Cape Cod. Retread was in the 80s and Carolina was in the 90s. And they were cold stunned, which is a common phenomenon here in New England in the winter months as water temperatures in Cape Cod Bay drop lower. Any sea turtles that have migrated up here for the summer should be making it back down to warmer waters But Cape Cod is such an unusual geographic feature that some reside too long. They end up getting cold stun, which includes suffering from pneumonia, hypothermia, lots of different sort of complications that can arise from a really, really cold body temperature and low metabolic rate, and get pushed up onto the beaches. We work with Mass Audubon down in Wellfleet to coordinate volunteers to find any sea turtles that wash up, triage them, bring them to our animal care center in Quincy, put them on the road to recovery and re-release. And most of the sea turtles that come to us are re-released back out into the wild. But every once in a while, there may be a special case, as was with our 2 loggerheads, where even after recovering and rehabilitating, they were still deemed non-releasable, likely unable to survive on their own. And then we need to find a home for them for the long term, and they happen to come to us. I've been here ever since.
Pretty perfect.
Yeah.
And I've heard that what is kind of deemed acceptable for re-release has changed over the years.
Certainly, yeah, I would say so.
And so I'm curious, because we spent some time. We did an interview at the Sea Turtle Hospital here. Mm-hmm. I got to go to a release. I saw it immediately, and it was wonderful. Yeah. And I'm curious now, like, would these turtles that are here now, do you think, would they be able to have been re-released if it was nowadays and what we understand? Obviously you can't, because once they're habituated,
I would say, if these, it's hard to really know, because there was a lot of evaluation that went into, particularly Carolina, I believe, who did strand more recently, that there was a lot of attempts made to really decide yes or no. And I think I do agree that I think the criteria has changed, has shifted over the years, so that there's an emphasis on trying to get as many possible sea turtles that might have a shot back out in the wild as we can. But it is really hard to know to what extent, what if they were to behave as they are today, back in 1990, what would the decision be made? Like they're definitely both sea turtles now, after being with us for decades, exhibit perfectly healthy lives, though they're sort of impaired at a sensory level. So retread is blind.
Okay.
And Carolina has some vision impairment, and then also has some, what we think is a neurological sort of underlying condition, where she doesn't seem to forage on her own for food. So we generally sort of find that those persist. But externally, they seem perfectly fine sea turtles. So it'd be hard to really evaluate the case to what extent maybe over 10, 20 years of care, their condition has improved to be releasable or not. But
right.
The fact that they've now been with us that long also sort of means that we need to continue to hold on to them.
Right, of course. They're definitely habituated to humans now, and watching, you can feed Myrtle. Well,
right. Myrtle would be,
but it would be a problem. Yeah. No, I'm not suggesting that they should be. The reason I ask is just because one thing that I've noticed at a lot of places is, the turtles that are in human care now are beat up. Like, there's a reason, whether it is bubble butt, whether it is missing flippers, whether it is bubble butt and missing flippers, the inability to eat, which you mentioned might be, a situation here or whatever. But like, it's very rare that you go to a facility and see a sea turtle like that is pristine.
Right, with no obvious physical issues.
Yeah, and all three of the turtles here look real good.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting to see. And I remember that being kind of the first time I had ever seen that when I was here. I was like, oh, these are real pretty sea turtles. And even when I was at the hospital last week, I was like, they're all so pristine because, they're cold stunned, they're getting released. They're gorgeous specimens. Yeah. And I was like, as cool as it is and knowing every story and stuff, there is just something about seeing an absolute pristine animal.
Yeah.
That is pretty rare these days with sea turtles, which is great. We want them in the ocean.
Right. 100%.
Yeah, they're enough that we can have them in aquariums and being great ambassadors for their species with their missing flippers or whatever. Right. Yeah. But it's really cool to see three just stunners here.
Yeah. They look physically awesome, and they're in great body condition and overall health. But it's you think that way, and then the first time retread swims straight into the reef or something, you're like, yes, I do remember why you were still with us.
That is fair. That is true. Yeah, no, that's it's just such a beautiful setup. But I guess we shouldn't just talk about sea turtles.
Yeah,
so
sure.
What else do we have in the giant ocean tank?
We've got a variety of things. So we generally are exhibiting subtropical and tropical Western Atlantic fish in the giant ocean tank. So those are species you would see if you went down to Florida, maybe up into the Carolinas, in the warmer waters of the Atlantic Ocean. And the bulk of the collection is, by number, is actually aquacultured. So they've been raised either by us or by partner organizations and institutions. So our biggest schooling species, our lookdowns and our smallmouth grunts, are raised in-house and in partnership with Roger Williams University. And then there's also a variety of things that come to us, a variety of fish species that come to us from a few different sources. We have some animals from other zoos and aquariums, like our southern stingray, who was born at the Minnesota Zoo. We have some locally rescued fish, we call them, Gulf Stream orphans, which are tropical fish that we're able to find in New England waters in the summertime when it's warm enough. So these are either larval fish, very, very young juvenile fish, or eggs that have been pushed up here by the Gulf Stream beyond their sort of typical range. And if we aren't there to opportunistically find them when it's warm enough, that they likely are not going to be migratory and move back to any warmer waters, and they'll just perish in the wintertime. So we go out seasonally looking for any of those fish that are a part of our exhibit collection plan that we'd like to exhibit in the giant ocean tank, and then if we find some, we can add them to the exhibit. And then there is also still some wild collection that we do for certain species. So that's one of the ways, basically using all three of those methods, or at least three, is how we kind of build the biodiversity that we want to showcase in a reef ecosystem.
Now, I find the wild collection thing a little, maybe surprising is the right word, because I know that in general, with the AZA in particular, there's a big push. We have SSPs, and the reason why we do is to stop taking animals from the wild. And when zoos in particular, as opposed to aquariums, do pull an animal from the wild, it's always, just like you were saying with the fish that will die, it's always that kind of purpose. And there's always a big press release about, oh, we're taking in these cougars, but they were going to die without it, or whatever. And I do know that it's more common to collect for aquariums, but I feel like it's something that's not talked about, not like hidden. It just doesn't come up a lot. So I'm curious as to what the thought is behind that, and is there any way to make sure that it's done, just like with seafood, like sustainably? Like, how does that work?
Yeah, precisely. I was going to just say it's similar, in my opinion, to sort of a well-managed fishery, or sort of the right policies and protections in place so that any sustainable harvest is done, but the overall health of the population in the wild is sort of the priority kept in mind. So generally, we're looking to acquire animals from the wild that we may be bringing in very small numbers, that we may be bringing in from populations that we know are well managed, from certain geographic regions where they are not imperiled in any way. And so some level of sustainable take is something that the population can accommodate. So that's generally sort of the strategy we use, and then diversifying those sources, as I mentioned, to say the right path for sort of sustainable collection planning is to look at all those options and make the best choice in each individual species circumstances. So like moving forward with a blend of all those is likely the best way to go about acquiring animals.
Cool. Yeah, that makes sense to me. I am curious. So I know, again, I tend to do a lot more at zoos just because there are a lot more of them. And I know that, like, with the exception of maybe certain insects and stuff, collection management is very specific. We know every animal. We know they have their name. We know they have their real name, that after a donor bought the fake name, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Yeah. They have their ZIMS number. They have all the things.
Lots of numbers.
And I'm curious how specific y'all are able to be when you have schools of fish and all that kind of stuff.
That is an ongoing challenge. The managing groups of animals, particularly when you have hundreds in a school, as you mentioned, that's an ongoing sort of area that we're continuing to explore and evolve. So what we currently do is we consider a school of fish if we determine they can't be identified to an individual level, then they are treated as an entity, as a group. And so we will have, to your point, like an identification number or an accession number for that school is applied to all the individuals in that group. There are lots of ways to try and make managing a group more manageable, and to try and break them up and to do things like identify them. So we've used techniques. One that I particularly like is called visual implant elastomer tagging, which is where you can use a very small amount of like fluorescent polymer to basically punctuate a little dot on the fin of a fish.
Oh, wow.
So you can use a small needle and put a little bit of something that will fluoresce, that will catch the eye, sort of the size of like a period or maybe a millimeter or two in diameter, and put that in sort of the translucent section of a fin membrane of a fish. And that way, if you are an animal care professional and you know exactly what you're looking for, it's pretty easy to spot. But most people would not necessarily tease it out as anything that's not typically there on the fish. Right. And so that's a nice visual option that exists in tracking fish. So we have used that technique if we have, let's say, several fish of a type of species, but they may be in different age groups. Like maybe we brought in 3 of fish X in this year, and then 3 years goes by and we add 3 more, and then 3 years go by and we add 3 more. And now we have what we think are 3 different age classes or cohorts that may be hard to tell apart, particularly as they grow up and all become adults and then mix together. And if we've got them for 5, 10, 15 years, it would be hard to keep them all straight at an individual level. But if they have some sort of visual tag that lets us know, oh, the yellow group came in this year, and then we can sort of track them that way, even as their physical appearance might change or they may start to sort of blend in with other individuals. So there's quite a few different strategies out there. Some of those, and those are generally developed by like the fisheries sciences for managing fisheries stocks and things like that, mark and recapture studies. So we look into any sort of advancements that are made in the fish relevant areas to try and improve our record keeping and also make it as clear and easy for us as we can.
Nice. Very, very interesting. So you've got this tank. It's giant. It's ocean. That's where the name comes from. Yep. Figured it out. Yep. And there's a lot going on in there.
There is.
You've got your coral setup. You've got schools of fish. You've got sea turtles. You've got rays. You've got a barracuda. How do you manage feeding all of this, and how much thought has to go into that, and how much do you have to worry about Myrtle interrupting other feedings, and
Yeah, it's complicated. I like to say that it's sort of it's a well orchestrated endeavor to manage the giant ocean tank, and I would equate it to something like putting on a play or putting on something that requires a ton of timing and sequencing, because our goal is to create a complex and biodiverse community of animals for the visiting public to witness and to learn from. So on our end, in order to make sure that all those needs are met and the complexity is maintained and harmonious, we are going to figure out a strategy that meets every animal's need, however it has to happen. So we basically design our daily tasks, the structure of our dives and responsibilities based on how we think we can best meet the needs of all the animals, because they are all mixing together. So that involves a few different strategies. There are many species in the giant ocean tank that are target trained, that come to a particular feeding location in the exhibit, that approach divers with particular objects for them to focus on. A lot of our animals are supplemented with vitamins to make sure that they're getting all of the trace nutrients that they need. And so that becomes very specific, where you say, oh, I actually need all the groupers to come over because I have a shrimp for each grouper in this box, and I'm going to line those up. So the level of detail can be pretty intense.
Wow.
And so that's sort of all factors in, and it's sort of many layers of the onion to figure out what's the best sequence to go about doing this. How many feeders do we need? How many divers versus surface tenders do we need in order to accomplish all of the attention that this community of animals is going to require? Make sure everyone gets what they need to thrive. And then before you know it, the day is done and we do it all over again. Yeah.
How many feedings do you do in a day?
We do just 2 right now, but they are both at the surface and below. So there's typically anywhere from 2 to maybe 5 feedings happening simultaneously during those feeding sessions. And it goes, typically about 30 minutes total, but there's no real endpoint, depending on how long it takes to get different animals to target or to come to session, things like that. So it's typically 2 feeding dives, and then as those resolve, we roll into maintenance dives to clean up after everybody after that.
Wow. There's a whole lot going on.
Yeah.
What kind of dive safety stuff do you all have to, worry about with that being so constantly occupied?
Yeah. We do have a diving safety program. We have 2 dive safety officers, and all of our diving staff and interns and volunteers go through first aid training for diving, oxygen administration. We do a lot of rescue drills and trainings to make sure everyone who gets in the giant ocean tank is comfortable doing things like responding to an emergency. And then we run through all the protocols out of the tank. If you have an injured diver or an unresponsive diver, how do you go through the right protocols to get them to first aid?
Yeah, makes sense. DSOs are very important people.
They are indeed.
Yeah.
And always diving with plenty of folks around helps. So that's another, because we're doing so many sequence things in the exhibit, it's typical that we'll have between 2 and 4 people in the water, plus at least 2 people at the platforms accomplishing surface tasks. And that also means that responding to emergency is that much more effective because you have so many folks able to help.
Right. Makes sense. Now, we're talking about emergencies to the humans in the water.
Yeah.
But what happens with emergencies or medical issues, whether they are emergency or not? What does the sheer size of the giant ocean tank do? Do we have vets in scuba suits down there doing work?
Sometimes.
Wow, that's amazing.
It depends on the vet. Yeah.
Tell me more about all of that.
Yeah,
because
totally.
That's fascinating.
Yeah. So on the medical case standpoint category, we are meeting at least weekly with our medical staff to go over any current medical cases that our inhabitants of the giant ocean tank have. Most of our large animals come out at least annually for a routine physical, regardless of whether or not they have any issues. They're just going to come out to get a health check as a benchmark. And then, as I mentioned, the turtles come out quarterly, generally as a minimum for weights and things like that. And if we have a planned procedure, the logistics for the giant ocean tank typically involve our hoist, which is a very useful piece of equipment when you have pretty big animals and you have water, which is quite heavy and gets heavy quickly when you need a large volume of it. So we do our best to keep appointment times in the giant ocean tank because we do not want to waste our medical staff's time if we have not acquired a fish who needs a checkup. And some fish are very hard to acquire out of the exhibit.
I believe
so
that.
Typically what we'll do is if we have something planned starting the day before, we will attempt to collect the animal for exam. And if that's successful, we move them into some sort of isolation enclosure. It's typically we have like 55-gallon barrels. We have some mesh pens that we can set up in the exhibit. And that allows us to isolate the animal and then also move them up in depth towards the surface gradually over the 24 hours leading up to the exam so that when we do remove them, if it's with the hoist or manually, if it's small enough, they're acclimated to sea level pressure. And we can then move them into one of our support spaces where any actual medical exams and procedures can go on. And the same process goes in case of medical emergencies. If we have an injured animal that shows up, then we can do all that, but it's just not planned ahead of time. We just go right into it.
Sure.
So that's the typical sort of response and way we medically manage cases for the giant ocean tank is staging them up in depth, planning out ahead of time. There's a lot of logistics and a lot of sort of customized equipment that we develop in order to do this. And the giant ocean tank, as we were talking when we were feeding Myrtle, is unique in that the top of the exhibit is open to the public and it's 360-degree access. So we are also quite flexible in the fact that our equipment generally has to be compressible down to be stored behind the scenes in places when it's not in use, and then we can bring it out and set it up as fast as possible for those time-sensitive situations, and get that into the exhibit, out of the exhibit, and wherever we need to go.
Very cool. Yeah. Is there anything else that you want to tell me about the giant ocean tank?
I would be remiss if I didn't highlight a fan favorite of the giant ocean tank that we did not touch on, who is Thomas, our green moray eel.
Oh, yes,
Because
Thomas, yes.
Thomas is another awesome animal. I think he may be the greatest eel I've ever worked with.
Wow.
And he's worth noting. So if folks listen to this and want to come by the aquarium and check out Thomas, he's one of the best. He's been here 15 years, and I think is a stellar eel. We've had eels over the years where maybe a grand total of 10 people have seen them because they pick a great hiding spot and no one ever gets to view them. But Thomas is one of the most outgoing and often on display. He picks some great spots to hang out.
Nice.
And so I think he's done a lot for eels.
That's amazing. Wow. Yeah. How, one other final question that I just thought of is obviously it's a very large tank. Mm-hmm. And so I'm assuming acrylic, not actual glass.
Yep. Yeah. Acrylic windows. They were glass actually before the renovation. That was part of the renovation in 2012 was that the original windows were multi-paneled laminated glass. And over the decades, you could have some separation, and we would have a problem not of any structural integrity, but you could actually get like moisture, and so there'd be fogging in between the laminated panels, which obviously does not help the aquarium setting and our viewing visitors. So that was one of the big things of the renovation was all the windows got replaced, and they're now single sheets of acrylic.
Wow. Okay. Very cool. What would happen if there was any kind of, little issue with just like one little piece of the acrylic? How would you handle something like that?
Well, I can. So things like scratches happen often. That's one of the artifacts of having things like big turtles in the exhibit.
Can't see very well.
Yeah, that too. Is that there are parts of turtles that are sharp and that can scratch acrylic. So that's actually one project we have going on right now is we're working on doing some underwater buffing. We're probably going to be manually buffing some scratches out of the acrylic, which is an awesome time. Highly recommend it.
Fun.
If you really want to increase your underwater hours, become an acrylic buffer because it takes a long time. And so yeah, there are issues like that that pop up, and it's something that we have to deal with and improve upon. Generally, the infrastructure of the giant ocean tank is quite robust. So not only do we have the asset of the concrete pillars, sort of the verticals that span the full depth of the exhibit, which are extremely strong, but the window framing itself is designed so that the windows are pushed up against that concrete structure. And so in addition to being fixed in place, it's also the pressure and the mass of the water behind the windows is really sort of keeping them immobilized in their position.
Interesting.
So the design of the giant ocean tank, when you think about it, is remarkable because the core design was done in the 60s and then implemented in time for us to open. And they pulled off making a giant cylindrical exhibit back at a time when you couldn't curve, glass. You couldn't curve acrylic. We didn't have that yet. And so they had to figure out how do we make a giant cylinder with a spiral all the way around it and access at the top. And all we can use are flat sheets of glass and concrete.
That's kind of amazing.
So yeah, I definitely tip my cap to the folks who originally designed the giant ocean tank because it was remarkable at the time and continues to be, I think, something that when people walk in, there's still the wow factor of you walk in the main building and you look up at the giant ocean tank and it's quite impressive, which is really awesome.
Yeah, no, absolutely it is. It's fabulous. Are there any conservation organizations you'd like to give a shout out to?
Oh, I mean, well, definitely we highlighted our rescue and rehab program, and I would say the network of organizations that helps pull off the seasonal rehabilitation of sea turtles is an awesome thing to witness from my perspective. And I know that's one of the ways that I got involved early on in doing a few internships in this line of work before becoming an employee was to get involved with our own rescue rehab program, our partners down in Massachusetts, Wellfleet Audubon, and then up and down the East Coast, all the places that sometimes receive turtles from us have their own cold stunning programs that go on. It's really cool to see the network that's been built over the years because it's one of those things where no one entity can really do it alone. And I think that's been a great advancement over the years, is that a lot of our sea turtle rehabilitation sort of colleagues and sort of the network has strengthened to the point where we're sort of a much bigger and dynamic entity that can help respond better.
Nice. Very cool.
It's time now, don't you know? We've come to the end of the show. But there's one tail left to go. You're gonna laugh and say, oh no. It's time for the Rossifari poop story.
Okay, let's see. I've got several, of course. I will say just the other day, we'll keep it Myrtle-centric. How about we do that?
I love it. Yeah.
Myrtle's poops are prolific. They are expansive. They are unappealing to swim through.
I believe that.
Which is sort of the core of my story, because we have, obviously, folks at all levels get to view the giant ocean tank, and I often find myself needing to turn to the public to say, like, what you see there is Myrtle's poop, and I just want you to know that I am going to swim through it, and I feel a certain type of way about it, and I don't want to be made fun of for doing this, and I want you to know that I am aware of what's happening when I'm doing this, because people, I think, get grossed out. But it is part of life. The other thing I like to highlight is that poops are very important, and keeping track of an animal's fecal activity is a great way to help monitor their baseline health. And so there have been times where we have gone a few days, perhaps, without noticing poops. Could be from a variety of animals, but in particular, Myrtle, being such a fabulous animal, we have in the past put out sort of an all points bulletin to folks across the organization to say, if you happen to witness Myrtle pooping, please make note of it for us, because we're going through our records and we're like, we actually aren't sure if Myrtle's pooped recently. And we want to make sure that everything's fine.
Right,
she's processing nutrients appropriately. She's not backed up. So if anyone sees Myrtle poop, please notify a giant ocean tank aquarist. And so those types of emails have been sent. And the poop response team is alive and well here at the New England Aquarium.
That's amazing. I loved her before I knew she was a prolific pooper. And now even more so. Amazing. Yep. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, it was a pleasure.
Now, before we get to my normal wrap-up spiel, I actually wanted to take a moment here. So I threw a microphone on myself and a microphone on Mike when he did the Myrtle feeding before we did our interview. And I had to cut it down a good bit. There was a lot of random chatter and guests asking questions and stuff. But some of it I thought was kind of interesting. So here are just some snippets of just what Mike and I kind of experienced as we were hanging out at the top of the tank. Mike was feeding Myrtle. Enjoy.
Tell me a little bit about what this process is like as far. So we're at the top of the tank here, and you're gonna do some turtle feeding. And tell me, is this a big draw? Do people like it? What is kind of the purpose for making this a public thing?
Sure. Yeah. Well, we are up at the top of the giant ocean tank, which is our largest exhibit, and I think the top of the exhibit specifically is a draw because I would say it's not too common that the general public has access sort of 360 degrees all the way around, particularly the top of large exhibits. And we like to highlight this area as a space for our conservation learning staff to answer questions and talk about Caribbean coral reefs and the animals that use them, as well as see our staff diving in the exhibit, doing feedings and maintenance and everything that goes into helping to run the whole thing top to bottom.
Yeah, no, that's really awesome. I remember when I was first starting on my journey and going to different, facilities. Mm-hmm. The idea of seeing the top of a tank was just so, it still is special. I'm not even going to lie.
Yeah, this is my favorite spot in the aquarium. I like being up here.
Every time I come here, I race up here. Yeah. And then I do the aquarium in reverse.
Yep. You
and then come back up. Yeah. It's a whole thing.
It's a popular flow.
But it's good. Yeah.
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 So yeah, we have 2 main feeding dives each day. And so this will be the afternoon feeding where we try and sort of do some multitasking where there are a handful of animals target trained to surface feedings. And then our divers simultaneously will be feeding different groups of animals beneath the surface. And I think sort of traditionally that's how Myrtle got started being fed over here on this platform is keeping her on this side helps the divers work in other places and also gives us a nice long session for her to be foraging, to get all the vegetation she eats. And we get a nice close look at her and sort of get to establish that as sort of the routine baseline care for Myrtle. She does like to snooze all over the place. So she's currently snoozing under an acclimation enclosure and in a part of the reef that she's sort of known to go to midday. I would say early in the morning and overnight. She has different napping spots depending on where she wants to go. But definitely well-versed in the structure of the reef and seems, as time goes by for a few months, she might like to nap here and then shift to a different spot later on. But she's been over in that general location for a good long time.
Nice. That's really funny. I'm always entertained by I wish we knew what the thought process is. You know what I mean?
Yep. There's benefits and drawbacks, I'm sure. I don't know what it is about each location that Myrtle in particular is looking for, but she does have her favorite spots.
That's very cool. So, trying to think of things to ask that I don't want to just ask in the room where we'll hear better.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure some things will unfold as we are actively feeding as well.
I have no doubt. Yeah. So is it still 3 sea turtles here?
3 total sea turtles, yes. So joining Myrtle is Carolina, our smallest.
Mm-hmm.
Or both of the smaller turtles are loggerheads.
Right.
Myrtle's a green. So Carolina is also, we think, the youngest. She's about 150 pounds, and we think she's probably in her 30s or 40s. And both loggerheads were rescue and rehab sea turtles, washed up on Cape Cod during the winter in a cold sunning phenomenon, were deemed non-releasable, and now live with us. So yeah, their breakfasts their daily feeding happens at the morning dive. So we call it loggerhead breakfast. But
nice.
They're target fed by a diver at the bottom of the exhibit. And typically it's one big meal full of squid and fish, and then they go off and snooze and hang out the rest of the way.
It's not a bad deal.
Yeah, retread will show up eventually at some point. The very common question that visitors have is how many turtles do you have? I've only seen one. Where are they? And we like to say, if you spend enough time up here, you will see them all.
Oh yeah,
they have to breathe. They will get up here. They can sleep for a long time, but they will eventually show up. We'll get started here in just a moment, and hopefully we'll get some fun audio. I was wondering if we would have the setting up here where you might get some nice Myrtle gasps for some color, because
we'll get some gasps.
Yeah,
it might not be Myrtles, but
right. Yeah, you'd have to come here at 8 a.m. When we're so close to be get a nice Myrtle breath. So we generally mix in any vitamins or supplements you might be getting into some squid. It's a nice little sort of natural food pocket to get those tabs. Yep. So that's one of the ways we'll make sure she's getting a nice, well-rounded diet.
How old is she?
She's very old. They don't know exactly how old.
We think 90s, maybe.
90. Yeah.
So they've been around since probably.
Yes, she came to the aquarium 6 months after we opened. So
That's the same turtle.
yeah. So if you've been here since 1970, you've seen her.
Oh my God.
Imagine eating 4 heads of lettuce every day. Typically, yeah, it's about 5 pounds of vegetables. But we try to mix it up, so she will try out bok choy, see if she's into that, but she hasn't been recently. So there's a variety of leafy greens that we'll make available to her, but the staples are romaine lettuce and Brussels sprouts. Those are really
once a day, right?
Twice a day. Yep.
Oh, right, look at them. 1 leaf at a time?
Yeah, we usually spread it out so that she gets some exercise while she's going around. And then it's kind of nice to have her preoccupied up here because the divers are trying to accomplish other things, or the folks on that platform might be feeding different animals. And Myrtle is sort of curious and outgoing enough that she will insert herself into other things.
Is the eel still in the tank?
We do have an eel in here as well. Yep. Thomas, a green moray eel.
Look at this, look at this. Here you go.
That was the
That
lettuce
was
wrap.
tricky.
The lettuce
That
wrap
was tricky.
technique.
I like it.
You can only get to that if you've been here for 10 years. That's expertise. You guys can see the barracuda right there. So if the barracuda is hungry, he should swim over to where that sign is. Yep. We want him to go to that platform and have lunch over there.
Does it eat any other fish in the tank?
Not commonly. That's, we want him to avoid that. We want everybody to get along. So we do target train him to feed over there and offer him food. So he's not usually motivated to hunt in here and look at any of the other animals. All right.
Oh, she's
That's
so perfect.
Myrtle.
She's
Hello.
so perfect. Y'all, meeting Myrtle was such a joy. And, Mike was pretty cool, too. Actually, kind of fun story. As most of y'all know, I was at the AZA conference last week, and I saw a large group trying to get a photo taken together. And I decided to, volunteer to be the photographer so everyone on the team could get in together. So I wandered over and I was like, hey, I can take your picture if you want. And the lady who was doing it was like, oh, that would be great. Thank you. And I took the photo. And I read some name badges and realized that it was the team from New England Aquarium. And as soon as I finished taking the photo, Mike bopped over and said hi, and we were able to catch up. So that was really nice and a lot of fun, and I was really appreciative of that. I love how small this world is, at least, when you go to the conferences that are based on the whole world existing. But anyway, great to see the team from New England Aquarium. I hope y'all enjoyed that. We've got one more episode from the facility coming your way soon about just something completely different than either of these things. It's another really cool off-site episode that I think you're going to get a kick out of. And don't forget to bring it back here on Friday. We have our Zoo News episode, and this week it is going to be a recap of the American Association of Zoo Veterinarians Conference, which is very interesting stuff. Before I go, I would like to say thank you to my Red Panda level patrons, Dr. Laura Schenk, Dr. Stephen Williamson, Barbara Bennett, Jenny Owens, and Kevin Williams. And remember, friends, the word credits backwards is Steiderk. The Rossifari podcast is produced, hosted, and engineered by John Rossi. Editing and fact-checking by John and Dr. Zoe Rossi. Our theme song is Sevens by Nathan Burke, performed by Nathan and John. Interrupting John theme and additional voices by Taylor Isaac Gray. You can reach John directly on Instagram and Facebook at Rossifari or by email at rossifaripod@gmail.com. Rossifari is part of the Daydreamer Media Network. Now, stop listening to me and go visit a zoo.